Lucas Grant had always believed that money could buy anything: power, loyalty, even health. And as the only son of the Grant family empire, his name sat on the cover of Forbes and Fortune more times than he could count. But tonight, none of those glossy headlines mattered. Tonight, his pulse line on the monitor was the only thing people cared about, and it was fading. Doctors lined the corridor outside his private ICU. Some of them had flown halfway across the world just to stand helplessly beside his bed. The most expensive machines surrounded Lucas like a cold steel prison. His father, Richard Grant, a man who once negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, now trembled beside his son's bed, gripping Lucas's cold hand with both of his own. A surgeon finally stepped forward, removing his mask with trembling fingers, and said, "Sir, we have done everything medical science allows. Lucas's condition has deteriorated beyond what we can control. I am truly sorry. We have called in specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, everywhere. They all said the same thing." Richard Grant's voice cracked as he looked down at the pale face of his only child and whispered, "Money, I can give you anything. I will build you a hospital. I will buy out an entire research lab. Please save him." No one answered in that sterile white hallway. Silence tasted like death. Outside the ICU, a young woman pushed her mop down the marble corridor. Her uniform was the same dull gray as the floor, her face half hidden behind a disposable mask. She paused when she saw the line of doctors, the media crews, the security guards. She heard the whispers. "The billionaire's son is dying." Even money failed him. She looked through the glass panel of the ICU door. Her eyes softened when they met Lucas's pale face. She had cleaned this hallway every night for 3 years. She had watched him through this same glass, never daring to get too close. Tonight, something pulled her feet forward. She stepped closer, her gloved hand pressed against the glass. A guard spotted her and stepped forward. "Hey, you, this area is restricted. Go back to the lower floor." She did not move. Instead, she spoke so quietly that only the guard heard her first words. "I can save him." The guard laughed, shaking his head. "Do you know who is lying in there? That man has the best medical team in America. If they cannot save him, who do you think you are?" She looked up at him, her eyes calm but bright with something fierce. "Let me see him. I need only an hour." Richard Grant heard the commotion and turned, exhausted eyes landing on the cleaner standing stubbornly by the door. "Who is this?" he asked hoarsely. The guard answered quickly. "A cleaner, sir. She says she can save your son. Should I remove her?" The hallway fell silent again. Doctors exchanged pitying looks. One surgeon let out a tired, bitter laugh, but Richard did not laugh. Desperation had already stripped him of pride. He stepped forward until he stood just inches away from the girl. "Do you really think you can save him?" She met his gaze without flinching. "I know I can, but you must trust me completely. No interference, no cameras, just me and him." The doctors protested. "Sir, this is madness. We cannot allow an unlicensed nobody to touch him." Richard raised a hand to silence them. The girl did not blink. Outside the window, the moon rose cold and white over New York. Inside the ICU, the heart monitor beat slower and slower. Richard's voice cracked again. "If you lie to me, you will disappear without a trace. I promise you that." She nodded. "If I fail, you won't need to punish me. He will die anyway." In that moment, Richard Grant did something he had never done in 70 years. He put the life of his empire's only heir in the hands of someone the world would not even look at twice. The girl stepped inside, closing the door behind her. One of the surgeons whispered under his breath, "What good is a cleaner when 100 doctors have already failed?" Outside, Richard did not answer. He pressed his forehead against the glass, watching the girl place her hand on his son's chest. "Sometimes the cure you beg for is hidden inside the one you look down on the most." Long before the machines and whispered prayers, Lucas Grant was the kind of man whose name opened doors before he even stepped through them. At 32, he was already the face of Grant Corporation, The empire his grandfather built from railroads and oil before transforming into a modern fortress of tech, finance, and biotech, with headquarters in New York and satellites in London, Singapore, and Tokyo. Lucas was groomed to rule it all, and for years he seemed unstoppable. His portrait graced the cover of Fortune with headlines like "The Youngest Billionaire CEO" or "The Future of American Industry." People envied his life, the penthouse above Central Park, the personal jet, the network of partners begging for his signature. But no one knew that every year when winter came, Lucas felt the sharp blade under his ribs, an old secret he never shared with the board, a fragile piece of him that no amount of money could fix. His heart had betrayed him since birth, a defect that doctors once called manageable until 5 years ago, when he collapsed on a golf course outside Boston, and only barely survived thanks to an emergency operation that half the medical world called a miracle. He recovered, returned to the boardroom with the same dazzling smile. But every night when the crowds were gone and the lights dimmed, Lucas sat alone, reading medical reports, test results, and alternative treatments. He'd poured millions into private research, yet each file ended the same way, a word he despised: incurable. This winter it returned, fiercer than before. His doctors insisted on experimental surgery. He delayed it again and again, claiming he was too busy overseeing the company's upcoming IPO, the one that would push Grant Corp's market value past $100 billion, securing its place among the giants. But the board knew the truth now. The whispers spread from the top floor to the janitor's closet. The golden boy of the Grant dynasty might not live to see his company ring the bell at Wall Street. While the Grant family wrestled with fear and pride inside glass towers, far below on the night shift, Ella quietly moved through polished corridors, pushing her cleaning cart. Her name tag just said Ella, no last name, no department. The other staff called her the Ghost, because she rarely spoke unless spoken to. She worked the worst shifts, the ones no one wanted, overnight or dawn, always silent, head down, mopping floors in the same methodical rhythm every night. To most people, she was invisible, a faint shadow sweeping past the gleaming brass elevators. The security cameras barely caught her face. No one ever wondered where she came from, why she never joined the other cleaners for a meal break, or where she disappeared to when the sun rose. Yet for 3 years she had chosen to work here at Grant Medical, the most advanced private hospital in New York, and she knew every corridor, every back door, every supply closet. Sometimes when the hallway was empty, she would stand by the ICU wing, watching through the glass as Lucas lay unconscious after another treatment. She memorized the way the machines beeped, the monitors flickered, the way he clenched his fists, even in sleep, as if fighting a war inside himself. She never spoke to him, never dared to step closer than the glass would allow. Her mop was her shield, her uniform her armor. Yet deep down she carried a secret heavier than any bucket she pushed each night, a memory of white coats, of lecture halls and operating rooms, a name that once echoed in conferences and medical journals. But that name had died years ago, buried under headlines that accused her of theft, fraud, betrayal, a scandal that ruined her, destroyed her career before it even bloomed. They said she stole research from a powerful pharmaceutical conglomerate, that she sold secrets for profit. The evidence was damning enough to silence her. Her mentor turned his back. The school erased her name from the alumni board. Her license vanished overnight, and the girl who once dreamed of rewriting textbooks disappeared, replaced by Ella the cleaner, who knew better than to speak up again. No one connected that ruined name with the girl pushing a mop down sterile hallways, and that was how she wanted it. Invisible, safe, until tonight, when the Empire's crown prince lay dying behind glass, and a voice inside her whispered that she could not watch him slip away like this. Not when she knew something the machines could not do, not when she alone still remembered the technique that once saved him, years ago, without him ever knowing her fate. As the hours ticked past and the doctors gave up hope, Ella tightened her gloves, her heartbeat calm, her secret life trembling at the edge of exposure. Some secrets do not stay buried forever. especially when the world's richest families forget that miracles rarely come from the boardroom. Inside the ICU, the night seemed endless. The hum of machines filled every second, while the doctors stood frozen outside the glass, waiting for a miracle they could not create. Ella stood by Lucas's bed. Her hand hovered over his chest, feeling the faint, uneven rhythm under her palm. He looked so small against the white sheets, yet his name weighed billions, enough to build cities, enough to bury people like her without a trace if she failed tonight. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the hum of the machines fade. She remembered every diagram she once drew, every hidden note she copied from her father's old journals, the pages she had memorized before the world called her a liar. Lucas's pulse fluttered, a thin, stubborn drum still clinging to the edge. She whispered his name under her breath like a promise, then pulled the thin blanket lower to reveal the fragile scar that cut across his ribs, the reminder of the first time she had saved him without him ever knowing her face. Upside. Richard Grant pressed his forehead against the glass, ignoring the whispers behind him, the board members he had dragged here in the middle of the night, the shareholders demanding answers on encrypted calls. The world was watching the King of Wall Street stand helpless while his only heir lay at death's door. And now some ghost girl mopped hospital floors dared to claim she could fix what their empire of money could not. He watched Ella move with steady hands, pressing her fingers along Lucas's chest, counting the weak beats, the way she leaned close, as if listening to a secret under his skin. A young doctor beside him shook his head. "Sir, she is no one. This is dangerous." Richard did not turn, his voice low and sharp. "Dangerous is burying my son tomorrow." Inside the glass box, Ella found the point where the pulse hesitated. She felt it with her fingers, the way her father once taught her. "Not every illness is only flesh and blood," he used to say. "Sometimes the mind holds the lock while the body holds the key." She took out the tiny leather pouch hidden in her uniform pocket. Inside were 3 fine needles wrapped in old silk, a relic from the only thing she kept when she vanished years ago. The first needle sank gently into the skin. Her breath matched his weak pulse, her hands steady while the world outside pressed against the glass waiting for her to fail. Minutes passed, one by one like stones dropping in water, until Lucas's fingers twitched. Ella did not look up. She whispered again, so soft no one could hear. "Wake up, Lucas. You do not owe this world anything except to live." Outside, Richard gasped when the heart monitor beeped louder, steadier, the machine's cold green line no longer crawling towards flat silence, but climbing back into life. A surgeon pushed closer to the glass, eyes wide. "What is she doing?" Richard did not answer. He'd just watched the impossible become possible right in front of him. Inside the room, Lucas's eyelids fluttered. A broken groan escaped his dry throat as if he was swimming up from a deep black ocean. The light above the bed stung his eyes when they opened, but the first thing he saw was not the machines or his father's pale face beyond the glass. It was her, the girl in the gray uniform leaning over him. Her eyes so close, so calm. He tried to speak, but his lips only cracked open. She pressed her fingers gently against his wrist. "Save your breath. You have a lot of living left to do." The door swung open when Richard burst inside, ignoring the protests from the nurses. He stopped a foot from the bed, staring at his son's open eyes, the color returning to Lucas's cheeks, the soft rhythm on the monitor that meant life was fighting back. Richard grabbed Ella's arm, his voice shaking. "What did you do? Who are you?" Ella slowly pulled the last needle from Lucas's chest, her eyes never leaving his. "I did what you asked. I saved him, but he needs rest if you want him to live." Lucas's dry lips moved again, trying to shape her name, but he did not even know it. She looked down at him one last time, then turned to Richard. "I need to leave." Richard blocked her path. "No, you do not move. You stay, and you tell me how you did this. Who taught you this?" Ella stepped back, but behind her, Lucas found his voice weak but clear. "Let her go, father." Richard turned his head sharply, "Lucas, you do not understand." Lucas shook his head slowly, eyes still locked on the girl. "She saved me once. I think she did it again. Now let her go." The doctors swarmed the bed, checking machines, fussing over numbers and readings, but none of them could explain what the cleaner had done. In the corner, Richard stood staring at the door where she had slipped away before anyone could ask her real name. He ordered the head of security to find her, watch every exit, but when the sun rose, Ella was gone, her locker empty, her uniform folded neatly on the shelf, the mop bucket dry and clean as if she had never existed. Days passed, and Lucas regained strength faster than any chart could explain. The surgeons gave interviews to the press, pretending it was the machines, the drugs, the experimental protocols. But Lucas knew better. At night, when the hallway was quiet, he stared at the ICU door, half expecting her to appear again. When he was strong enough to stand, he demanded his father tell him what they knew about the cleaner. The files were thin, a fake name, a rental apartment paid in cash, no next of kin, no past. Richard tried to dismiss it as a ghost story, a debt paid in full, but Lucas knew a debt like that never disappeared. Back at the Grant Tower, the board met in secret behind glass walls that overlooked the skyline. They whispered about Lucas's strange recovery, about the cleaner who vanished like smoke. Some said she was a fraud who got lucky, others said she was dangerous. Someone who knew too much? Investors demanded an explanation. The stock price trembled under rumors that the heir was still too sick to lead an empire this size. Lucas ignored the whispers. He signed papers between medical tests. He read reports, but every free second his mind circled back to her, the girl who had saved him twice, without ever telling him her name. One night, after a board meeting dragged past midnight, Lucas slipped away from his security detail. He took a cab alone for the first time in years and found himself standing outside a low brick building on the edge of Queens, the last address tied to Ella's fake ID. He knocked on doors, climbed narrow staircases, but no one had seen a girl like her. No one knew a cleaner with eyes that looked right through you. He sat on the curb under a broken streetlight, wondering why a billionaire who could command an army of private investigators now sat alone, hoping to find a ghost. When he finally found her, it was not through money but memory. In a dusty archive in the hospital basement, he found an old staff photo, one he had never noticed before, taken 5 years ago during his first near death. The interns and students gathered around the OR table, and there she was, standing behind a surgeon, her hair tied back, her eyes locked on him through the lens. The same eyes that had looked at him through glass so many nights. The same eyes that pulled him back from the edge. Her name was not Ella on the file, but Eleanor Wu, once a medical prodigy, who vanished under a cloud of scandal. Lucas stared at the old photo until dawn broke over the city skyline behind him. He knew now she had saved him twice, and the debt he owed could not be paid with money or silence. Lucas left the hospital against the doctor's orders and returned to the tower, standing before the board with a new fire in his voice. He ordered a private investigation into the pharmaceutical giant that destroyed Eleanor's name years ago. His father tried to stop him. The legal team warned him about lawsuits, bad press, lost contracts. But Lucas would not back down. He made promises in back hallways, met with old allies who owed him favors, burned bridges that once made him untouchable. Somewhere in the chaos, a truth began to form. Piece by piece, a hidden trail of reports, forged evidence, secret payoffs, that led back to a name everyone knew, but no one dared say aloud. While lawyers and lobbyists fought behind closed doors, Lucas did what no one expected. He walked back into the hospital, not as a patient, but as a man looking for someone he could not forget. He checked every supply closet, every break room, spoke to every cleaner and nurse who might remember a girl with quiet eyes and steady hands. Each night he returned to the same corridor, outside the ICU, pressing his palm against the glass where she once stood. In that cold reflection, he promised himself this debt would not stay buried like the lies they told about her. Somewhere in this city, Eleanor Wu was still out there, sweeping floors to stay invisible while the empire she helped save tried to pretend she never existed. Lucas Grant, the boy with the failing heart, was gone. The man who owed her everything had taken his place, and this time he would find her, no matter what it cost him. For days, Lucas disappeared from the meetings and phone calls that usually wrapped around him like chains. His father's advisors whispered about him losing focus. The board worried the IPO would slip through their fingers if the golden heir kept chasing shadows. But Lucas no longer cared about shareholders who measured worth in profit and loss columns. He cared about the one person who saved his life when the best minds in medicine had failed him twice. The only person who never asked for anything in return. In his private office, he pinned every piece of her old life on the wall: the faded student ID, the news clippings that called her a thief, the hidden files from an old professor who once vouched for her before he too vanished into early retirement. Lucas studied the names that appeared again and again. The same pharmaceutical conglomerate that had partnered with Grant Corp on half a dozen projects, the same executives who once sat across from him at polished tables in Dubai and London. He saw it clearly now, the connection that made his stomach twist with anger. 5 years ago, the year he first collapsed on that golf course, the same year Eleanor's research disappeared, a confidential report had quietly transferred the patents she developed to a shell company that now held the key to a billion-dollar heart treatment pipeline. Lucas looked at the old diagrams she had drawn, the same patterns she traced on his chest that night while machines had failed him. He wondered how many other lives she could have saved if they had not buried her name. He called in an old friend from Harvard, Oliver Hale, now a lawyer with a reputation for pulling secrets out of steel vaults. Oliver had once drunk cheap whiskey with Lucas in dorm rooms, before the suits and the quarterly earnings calls. Now he sat across the conference table staring at the wall of Eleanor's life, pieced together like a puzzle. "You know this is war," Oliver said. "If you go after them, they will bury you too." Lucas leaned back in his chair. "They already tried to bury me twice. I'm still breathing because she didn't let them." While Oliver dug through legal loopholes, Lucas visited every place that might remember her. He found the old apartment building where she rented a single room under a fake name. The landlord shrugged, said the quiet girl always paid cash, left no trace when she left. He found a church soup kitchen where she once volunteered at dawn. The old nun there remembered a girl with soft hands who never asked for help but always stayed late to sweep the floors. One night, Lucas sat on a cold bench outside that church staring at the traffic crawling past, wondering if she was out there watching him too, staying close enough to see him live but far enough to stay forgotten. He wished he could tell her he did not want a miracle to vanish into the dark again. He wanted her to stand beside him in the light, where no one could twist her name into something dirty. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical giant felt him breathing down their neck. Rumors leaked that the Grant heir was preparing to sever a partnership worth billions, a partnership that fed money through secret channels, greased the right hands to keep certain research buried. Their lawyers sent threats, dressed up in polite language, warning of breach of contract, market destabilization, potential scandal, if Grant Corp refused to stay quiet. Lucas ignored every warning. He pushed Oliver to dig deeper, to find the signatures that would link the shell companies to the same boardroom that once clinked champagne glasses at his father's birthday gala. The deeper they looked, the uglier it got. Hush money paid to a dying professor who once supervised Eleanor's thesis, confidential settlements to whistleblowers who vanished overseas, donations disguised as charity flowing into shadow accounts. In his penthouse late at night, Lucas stared at the city lights, wondering if she was doing the same, watching the towers that kept her truth locked away. He missed the way her hand had steadied his chest, the calm certainty in her eyes when everyone else had given up. He missed the part of himself that had felt human when he looked at her, not a figure on a balance sheet, not a prince in a glass tower, just a man with a broken heart, asking someone to hold it together one more time. Richard Grant tried to pull him back to reality. He stood in the office doorway one night while Lucas read depositions and old medical journals spread across his desk. "Son, you are gambling with everything we built. This company needs your focus, not your obsession with a girl who chose to disappear." Lucas looked up, his eyes clearer than they had been in years. "She didn't choose to disappear. You made this world so tight she had no room to exist." Richard slammed a hand on the table. "You think I don't know how this game works? I built this world so you would never be powerless, yet here you are begging to destroy it for someone who won't even show her face." Lucas stood, folding one of Eleanor's old research notes into his pocket. "If she won't show her face, I'll find her and I'll show them all what they buried." He walked out before his father could say more. Outside the boardroom, the same men who once toasted him whispered behind his back, some ready to vote him out if he kept pushing, but none of them knew what it felt like to wake up on a hospital bed, because a girl no one would hire to scrub floors still knew more than 100 men with framed degrees. 1 week later, Lucas sat quietly in the back of an old lecture hall at NYU Medical. A guest speaker was presenting a paper on alternative cardiac therapies, quoting research that sounded hauntingly familiar. The speaker, a young surgeon, rattled off stats and slides that looked too polished, too clean, stripped of the raw, handwritten notes Eleanor once filled her journals with. Lucas waited until the Q&A began, then stood and asked a single question that cracked the room open like a stone through glass. "Where did you get that data?" he asked, his voice calm. The rows of students fell silent. The surgeon stammered some generic line about institutional support, but Lucas pressed again. "Did you ever meet the researcher who wrote that data? Did you ask her permission before you stole her name off the cover?" Whispers hissed through the rows. The surgeon glanced at the faculty moderator, who looked pale as stone. Lucas tucked his hands in his pockets, a shark smiling in a room that thought he came unarmed. After the lecture, he caught the surgeon in the hallway, cornered him between vending machines, pressed him for a name. The kid broke like cheap glass. A name spilled out, not hers directly, but the old professor who signed off on the stolen paper. Lucas walked out into the winter night, with his breath steaming in the cold. He knew where to go next. He found the professor in a private clinic, a man who once promised Eleanor she would rewrite the textbooks before he folded when the pharmaceutical giant offered him a golden handshake. Lucas sat across from him in a white office that smelled of antiseptic and false virtue. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He only laid out the chain of evidence on the polished desk, each piece enough to ruin the professor's cushy retirement, his legacy, his carefully scrubbed reputation. In the end, the man signed a statement, trembling hands holding the pen, confirming Eleanor's work was stolen, confirming the buried files, the payoffs, the hidden hand that made her disappear. Lucas walked out with that statement burning a hole in his coat pocket. He knew it was not enough. He needed her to stand beside him when the world saw the truth. He needed her to say it in her own voice. When he stepped back into his penthouse, Oliver was waiting. Fresh documents spread across the table, a plan to take the pharmaceutical giant to court, to break the contracts wide open, to expose the billion-dollar lie. "This won't hold if she doesn't show up," Oliver warned. "You have the proof, but you don't have her. If she stays hidden, the board will bury this before the stock hits the floor." Lucas looked out at the skyline again, the city glittering like a field of broken stars. "Then I'll find her. Not with money, not with lawyers, but with the truth she gave me the night everyone else gave up." He closed his eyes, and for the first time since that night he could almost feel her fingers on his chest again, steady and warm, reminding him he was still alive. Somewhere in this city, Eleanor Wu was still alive, too, and he was done living without her. Lucas knew that if he wanted to find her, he had to stop looking with the eyes of a man used to buying secrets. He had to remember who she was, not who they said she was. So he started going back to the places where people were invisible. He visited night shelters where cleaners sat hunched over stale coffee. He spoke to nurses who worked double shifts and cashiers who never asked for names. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Stories about a quiet girl who helped patch up small wounds in the staff break room, a girl who always left before dawn, a girl who never asked for anything. One rainy night, Lucas stood under the yellow streetlight outside a 24-hour laundromat in Brooklyn. He watched the door swing open, and a woman stepped out, gray hoodie pulled low over her face. She looked up once before ducking her head again, but that second was enough. Those eyes had haunted him every night since the ICU. "Eleanor," he said her name like a prayer he did not deserve. She froze but did not run. Maybe because she was too tired to run anymore, or maybe because she knew deep down he would find her eventually. He took a step closer, his breath catching when she did not back away. "I have been looking for you," he said, his voice softer than the city noise around them. "You should not have," she said, her tone flat, but her eyes betrayed her calm. He saw the exhaustion there, the sharp edge of fear and something else, something that looked like hope trying to survive. "I owe you more than my life," Lucas said. "I owe you the truth and your name back." Eleanor looked past him to the neon signs flickering across the street, the world that had turned its back on her once. "I do not want it back," she said. "I do not want them to drag me under again." He shook his head. "You deserve more than mops and empty hallways. You deserve to finish what they stole." She almost laughed, but it cracked halfway out. Her breath misted between them. "You think they will just let me stand up again? You think they will apologize and hand it all back because you say so?" Lucas stepped closer until their shoulders nearly touched. "Not because I say so, because you will say so. They ruined my name too. They tried to bury me alive, but you pulled me back when every other doctor gave up. You did not ask my permission that night. You did not wait for someone to tell you it was safe. So do not ask me to stand by and watch you disappear again." He held out his hand as if she might take it. She did not, but she did not walk away either. She stared at that outstretched hand like it was fire, something warm and dangerous. "I cannot fight them alone," she whispered. He almost smiled. "You won't." The next morning the news broke like glass shattering on marble. Grant Corporation's young CEO filed a motion to freeze all pending contracts with Trident Pharmaceutics, citing evidence of fraud and intellectual theft. The board panicked. Investors called in the middle of the night. The family's lawyers threatened to lock Lucas out of his own office. But when the cameras showed up at the courthouse steps, they did not find Lucas alone. Eleanor stood beside him, her face pale, but her chin lifted. The world saw the girl they once erased, now standing under bright lights, holding folders of evidence with her name stamped on every page. Richard Grant watched from the tower's highest floor as the reporters screamed questions no PR team could smother. He knew the numbers would tumble, he knew the empire's stocks would take a beating, but when he saw his son standing shoulder to shoulder with the girl who was never supposed to speak again, he saw something that looked suspiciously like real power, the kind that did not bend when checks changed hands. In the courtroom, the pharmaceutical lawyers sneered behind polished desks, but Eleanor's voice did not shake. She laid out every stolen note, every lab test, every signature forced under threat. She showed how her work had been laundered through shell companies, how the miracle drug Lucas once funded was built on her stolen blueprints. Lucas sat behind her every minute, eyes locked on the jury, making sure every word she spoke landed like a stone thrown into deep water. On the fourth day, the opposing counsel tried to break her calm, throwing her old scandal headlines in her face, calling her a liar, a thief, a disgraced dropout. She did not flinch. She only turned slightly, looking at Lucas sitting 2 rows behind, then back to the lawyer. "You can call me whatever you want," she said, "but every time you do, just remember I am the reason he is alive to hear you lie." The courtroom held its breath. Lucas felt something break loose inside him, a weight that had pressed on his chest for years lifted by that single sentence. He realized then that no matter what happened next, even if they lost every contract, even if they stood alone, she would never be invisible again. Outside, the courthouse cameras waited to twist every detail. Some headlines called her a hero, Some called her a fraud in disguise. Protesters held signs on the sidewalk, some in support, some spitting ugly rumors. But in every photo, Lucas's hand was wrapped around hers like an anchor. Trident tried every trick left in their book. Bribed witnesses, floated hush money through back channels, but Oliver Hale dragged those secrets into the light piece by piece. Each night, Lucas and Eleanor sat together in a rented conference room, marking files with highlighters, piecing together the truth she thought she would never be strong enough to say out loud. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they sat in silence. But they were never alone in the dark again. When the final verdict came, the courtroom did not erupt in cheers. It fell into a hush sharp enough to draw blood. The judge's words echoed in the marble chamber like thunder. Trident was found guilty of fraud, ordered to surrender the patents, fined billions for damages. Grand Corporation's board tried to pretend they were innocent bystanders, but Lucas stepped in front of the microphones that afternoon and told the world he would never again sign a paper without reading the fine print twice. Reporters asked if he planned to rebuild the lost contracts, if the family would forgive the losses. He looked straight at the cameras. Money can be made back. A stolen life cannot. That night, Eleanor sat across from him in the same quiet diner where she once hid between shifts. She sipped cold coffee while he watched her like he was memorizing every freckle on her cheek. "You should hate me," he said. "I dragged you back into this war." She shook her head. "You gave me back the only thing worth more than a clean hallway. My name." She reached for his hand this time, her fingers fitting between his like they belonged there all along. He squeezed them so tight the world could have fallen apart around them and he would not have noticed. Somewhere outside, the city lights still blinked cold and greedy, but for the first time since he could remember, Lucas did not care what Wall Street thought of him. He cared about the girl who taught him how to breathe again, the girl whose name the world would never forget again, the girl he would never let disappear into silence as long as he was alive. In the weeks that followed the courtroom victory, headlines shifted almost overnight. Investors who once threatened to pull out of Grant Corporation now rushed to praise Lucas for exposing corruption. Talk shows debated Eleanor's story, half of them painting her as a phoenix who rose from ashes, the other half whispering that maybe she had planned this all along. Through it all, Eleanor stayed mostly silent. She let the lawyers and the PR teams handle the noise, while she buried herself in a small lab tucked inside an old wing of Grant Medical, a space Lucas carved out just for her. She did not want interviews or applause. She wanted the last 5 years of stolen work to breathe again under her own hands. Lucas visited her there every night after the tower lights went dark. He would stand by the door, leaning his shoulder against the frame, just watching her hover over microscopes and notes spread like constellations across her workbench. Sometimes he brought her coffee. Sometimes he just sat there in silence, feeling a strange peace in the hum of machines and the soft scratch of her pen against paper. He learned to see her not as the miracle that saved him, but as a woman who woke before dawn, who skipped meals when she got caught in an idea, who laughed too softly when he tried to tease her about leaving the lab for fresh air. But nothing good in their world stayed untouched for long. One evening, as a gray drizzle tapped against the lab windows, Eleanor pulled him aside, her fingers twisting a pencil into nervous knots. "I found something," she said, her voice tight. He leaned closer over her shoulder to read the lines of numbers and scans spread before her. She pointed to a small cluster of irregularities buried in his latest test results, something the best doctors had missed or ignored, something she could not pretend away. "It's back," she said. Her hand trembled when she said it. For a long moment he did not speak. He just reached up and cupped her face, brushing away a strand of hair damp with her worry. Then he smiled, the same stubborn, crooked smile he always gave the board when they told him something was impossible. "Then we fix it again," he said. "But this time," Eleanor whispered, "it's different. The scar tissue is worse. The damage is deeper. I do not know if even I can. She could not finish the thought. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice so low only she could hear. You brought me back once when the world gave up. If I go down again, I want it to be your face I see last. Not some cold machine. Just you. She pushed him back, frustrated by how calm he sounded. You think this is romantic, Lucas. You think it's noble. It's not. You do not get to just choose to die in my arms because it makes a nice ending for you. You fight. You fight for every damn breath because you owe me that much. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time since the trial ended, he saw the crack in her armor. The part of her that was still that scared student who watched her future burn down around her name. Lucas pulled her into his chest and let her stay there until her breathing steadied. When she stepped back, she wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand and pointed at the test results again. There's one thing we can try, but it's not legal here yet. It's experimental, and the risk is... She swallowed hard. If it fails, it won't just fail, Lucas. It will end you in that room. He nodded. Then we do it somewhere they can't tell us no, somewhere they don't own the words possible and impossible. For the first time in weeks, she laughed, sharp and wet, and punched him lightly on the chest. I hate how easy you make it sound. He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips. That's why you keep me around. The next days blurred into secret flights and quiet deals. Oliver found a small team willing to operate offshore, where red tape could not choke them. Eleanor worked around the clock, building custom equipment from scratch, recalibrating protocols she once only dreamed of writing. She moved through sterile halls like a ghost again, but this time, Lucas was always there at her shoulder, catching her when she forgot to sleep, reminding her to eat even when the fear in her eyes said she tasted only metal. On the night before the surgery, they lay side by side in a small hotel room overlooking the dark ocean. Neither slept. She traced her finger along the scar on his chest, the old one, and the new map that marked where her needles brought him back. He caught her hand and held it against his heart, feeling how thin the wall was between tomorrow and forever. If this works, he said, what will you do then? She smiled against his shoulder. I will finish my research. I will build that clinic we always whispered about when we were kids, with our heads full of impossible ideas. A place that does not care what your name is or how big your wallet is, just a place that listens. He kissed the crown of her head. Then I guess you'd better not let me die. She smacked his chest softly and laughed so quietly it made him want to bottle that sound forever. When dawn came, they rode to the clinic, hand in hand. The team met them at the back entrance. No press, no board, no empire watching. Just Lucas and Eleanor and the small circle of people who owed them nothing except honesty. As they wheeled him into the sterile room, he held her eyes the whole time. Do you trust me? He asked as the anesthetic mask hovered above his face. Always, she said, her voice cracking in the white light. When his eyes closed, she stayed beside him, one hand resting on the edge of the table, the other clutched around the locket she wore under her lab coat, a tiny photo of her parents, and a faded note from her old mentor, who once called her the bravest mind of her generation. Hours passed. The machines beeped. The ocean wind rattled the windows. Inside that room, Eleanor's calm cracked and rebuilt itself 100 times. She guided the surgeons, adjusted the process mid-step, demanded they trust her equations over the standard protocol. Her voice never wavered, even when her heart screamed that she might lose him anyway. Somewhere in the chaos, one of the older surgeons leaned close and whispered, "Who taught you all this?" Eleanor did not look away from Lucas's chest, rising and falling under the lights. "No one," she said. "I taught myself because no one else would dare." When it was done, the head surgeon stepped back, pulling off his gloves with trembling hands. He looked at her, and then at the monitor that now pulsed a steady, calm green. Eleanor collapsed into the nearest chair, her eyes locked on Lucas's breathing. The world outside that tiny room did not know yet that the boy they called the billionaire prince had slipped death's grasp again. And this time, no board or scandal or lie could rewrite whose hands brought him back. When Lucas woke, it was night again. The ocean hummed against the glass. He felt her fingers wrapped around his, her head resting on the edge of his bed, fast asleep for the first time in days. He smiled, soft and small, then shifted his hand just enough to brush his thumb against her knuckles. She stirred, blinking awake, eyes wide with relief when she saw him watching her. "Told you I would come back," he rasped. She laughed and cried at the same time, pressing her forehead to his wrist. He tangled his fingers in her hair. "No more running," he whispered. "No more ghosts." She nodded against his hand, and for the first time she believed it too. Outside the clinic windows, the first pink edge of dawn split the black ocean sky. Somewhere out there, the towers of the city waited to swallow them again, to twist their names into stories they could not control. But here, in this small circle of light and clean sheets, there were no more stolen futures. There was just Lucas, breathing steady under her palm, and Eleanor Wu, no longer a ghost, but a woman who stood between death and the man she refused to lose. Weeks later, when Lucas was strong enough to walk unassisted, he stood with Eleanor on the rooftop of the new clinic they were building together. Below them, the city pulsed the same as ever, indifferent to miracles and tragedies alike, but up here the wind carried something cleaner than the noise, a promise that their war had carved out a small corner of the world where no one would be forgotten again. The press called him the billionaire who risked it all for a ghost, and now that ghost was flesh and blood beside him, her white coat bright against the morning sun, her name stitched proudly above her heart. Dr. Eleanor Wu, no longer erased, no longer hidden behind mop buckets and silent hallways. Investors who once called Lucas reckless now begged to be part of the new foundation he and Eleanor built, but this time he made them sign papers that gave him no control over her work, no chance to twist her research into another commodity to be hoarded by the highest bidder. The world still ran on money, but in this small corner they planted something that no dollar could buy, the simple truth that some lives deserved saving, not because they were worth billions, but because they were worth everything. Some nights they still sat together long after the staff went home. Lucas would lean back in his chair, reading through Eleanor's scribbled notes scattered across the table, and she would watch him, the way she used to watch through the glass years ago, when she was just a cleaner with a secret too heavy to speak aloud. Sometimes he teased her about her terrible handwriting. Sometimes she reminded him he was alive because of that same scribble. They argued about everything except the one thing they both knew without question. They would fight for each other every time, no matter how high the towers rose or how deep the lies ran. On the day the new wing of the clinic opened, Eleanor stood in front of the cameras for the first time without flinching. She told the world her story in her own words, how a system that promised to save lives instead crushed those who dared to think differently, how sometimes it took a man with everything to lose to stand up for someone who had nothing left to hide behind. When she finished, she turned and found Lucas waiting off stage, clapping, slow and proud, like he would stand there forever if she asked him to. She walked to him without hesitating, and when he pulled her close, there was no glass between them, no secrets left to bury. Long after the reporters left, after the donors and board members drifted away in black cars, Lucas and Eleanor stayed behind under the soft hum of the new wing's lights. He touched her cheek the way he did that first night when he promised her the truth. She asked him what he saw when he looked at her now. Not the surgeon, not the scandal, just her. He answered without thinking. "I see the reason I'm still here," he said. "I see every breath they couldn't take from me because you wouldn't let them." She laughed, soft and tired, resting her forehead to his chest. "And what do you see when you look at yourself?" she asked. He thought about it for a heartbeat, then brushed his lips against her hair. I see a man who finally knows what her real life costs and who he wants to spend it with." She smiled, her hands slipping into his, her heartbeat steady against his ribs. Above them, the city stayed restless, hungry for the next scandal, the next empire to build and burn. But inside this small circle they made together, two people once buried under secrets now stood unafraid. Some debts are paid in silence, some in gold, but the rarest debts are paid in love that outlasts every lie. "Love is not what saves us," Lucas whispered once to her in the dark. "Love is what makes us fight when everything else says give up." And for once Eleanor did not argue. She just nodded and let him hold her closer. Under the endless New York sky,